Carrie, there will not be a quiz at the end. If there were a quiz, we would rebrand this as an e-learning and charge money for it. To answer your question. This is just an info drop, if you will. Hashtag adding value.
Hashtag adding value.
Amen. Hello, my name is Tucker Johnson, and I am your host today as we experience Nimdzi Live, where we talk about the latest and the greatest in translation, localization, internationalization, culturalization, and all that fun stuff that all you global companies need to delight your international customers, or at least not to piss them off too much. Here on Nimdzi Live, we like to have guests with a good story or a good data set, people that like to have fun, and people that like to hashtag add some value. I'm always eager to talk. We are always eager to talk and provide a platform to those with a good story for the industry. So let us know if there are any topics out there that you'd like covered or guests that we should reach out to for future episodes. And I am joined today, of course, by my co-host. Now, I finally got her to agree to that title. Nika Allahverdi. Hey, Nika.
Everybody, thank you for joining.
You want to tell everybody to subscribe?
Everybody subscribe.
There we go.
What else?
You're already here.
So
your finger's on the button.
Today, a couple different platforms. We go live when we go live and talk about things that we talk about. So follow us by subscribing, and Tucker, you'll talk about this in a second, but by subscribing, you get notifications when we go live. You get to ask some questions if you join us live, and you get to network with other people. But yeah, subscribe.
Do it.
It's fun here. Do it.
What are we going to plug today? I know we're going to plug Nimdzi Learning because what we're talking about today is actually, I'm reusing this. We did this already. We did this as a part of a workshop for a program that we offer here at Nimdzi Insights called Sales Bootcamp. What's the official branded title, Nika?
For the Sales Bootcamp?
Yeah.
We're still working out that service, but there's a series of workshops that we offer. Mm-hmm. And right now we're training BDR, so it's a BDR bootcamp.
Yeah, so it's like a 2-week intensive onboarding. We're working with some LSPs. We hired a bunch of sales. We interviewed 100 salespeople. We hired 20. We're going to put them through a boot camp, and we're going to end up with 10 at the end. So if that sounds like something that's not very fun, that you don't want to do, give us a call. Give us a call, and we can help you with that. But
even if you don't make it to working with a company at the end, you still get a certificate.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
The training.
All right, let's, we got quite the slides to get through today, Nika, so I don't think I'm going to do any more shameless plugs. Let's get right into it. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. Got a bunch of people joining us here. Make yourself known here over in the comments. Ask questions throughout this process, but let's get right into it, shall we? So, today on Nimdzi Live, we are going to be talking about localization lingo. Terminology, acronyms, all of this fun stuff. Now, kind of my intention originally when I was doing this in a workshop was that this is going to be something that is really valuable to people that are just getting into the industry, kind of like the BDRs that we're putting through the boot camp. And it can be really intimidating. What the heck is L10n? What the heck is G11n or I18n? What is a TMS? What is a CAT tool? What is a glossary? What does a glossary mean in our industry? And these are some things that they're so simple to define, but if you don't know them, it's gonna stop you. It's gonna block you from really accelerating your growth in this industry. And so that is why we're going to go through this. Now, before we get started, I want to give a shout out because we're doing this for Nimdzi Learning, I want to give a shout out to our colleague, Belen Aguyo Garcia, Dr. Belen, I should say. Belen is, besides just being an amazing person, she has basically built Nimdzi Learning. So if you've gotten value out of the e-learning modules that we have online, or if you participated in a live Nimdzi workshop or in-person Nimdzi workshop, or otherwise benefited from what we're doing at Nimdzi Learning, that ain't me. That you got Belen to thank for that. And she is moving on to greener pastures. She's moving on to the next step in her career and will no longer be our e-learning guru, but she set the stage for us to be able to continue publishing thanks to her hard work. So, sign language clap for Belen here.
Yeah, Belen will still be definitely in our industry and working around the topics that she is very familiar with. And we hope that we still get to work with you, Belen, and see you and learn from you.
She doesn't know that I have this slide here, so I don't know if she'll see this even or not. Let's get right into it. So this is kind of a workshop format today, guys. It's because it's taken from a workshop, and in this lesson, we're going to go over language company terminology, language technology terminology, language services terminology. And then we're going to kind of go in deep on some subjects like quality and testing, measuring success, talking about KPIs and SLAs and profit margins and all of that stuff. And we're going to highlight some things that through our careers, Nika and I put our heads together on this, and through our careers, these are the things that we've seen people misunderstand the most. So we're going to talk about them today. Before we get into it, I want to talk about this concept that we have here at Nimdzi. It's you name it, and I'm sure I stole this from somebody, but you name it, you own it. And this is in regards to terminology. And I have the example here. The term LSP, Language Services Provider, did not always exist. Now, my business partner, Renato Beninato, claims publicly that he invented this term back during his CSA days with his first wife. I'm his second wife, I guess. And it stuck. It stuck. And this is a very powerful tool. So I use the example is that I wrote a book called The General Theory of the Translation Company, and actually a lot of these terms are selected from the back. There's a glossary in the back here. Mm-hmm. But in this book, we purposefully put in some terms that no one's ever used before. And the reason we did it is because it's an excellent benchmark, or not benchmarking, but it's an excellent tool to understand what is the reach and what is the influence of this book over the years. Now, some of the terms that we made up in here, like we have a term like CLP, Contracted Language Professional, for freelancer. It didn't stick. Nobody uses that term because it's a stupid term. I admit that. But other terms, I see, I didn't know of anyone using the term LSB, Language Services Buyer, prior to the book, and nowadays I see people posting about language services buyers. So it's kind of interesting and it's kind of gratifying. Give it a try. If you're defining yeah?
If I can add, at the same time, those terms need to exist, right? They didn't exist before because the space was young and still forming. And so as needs arise for things manifest, things exist. And that also is reflected in language. Mm-hmm. So Tucker, when you're saying you see the reach of certain words that are getting used more often, that's because those concepts or those words need to be used more often. That's reflected in language.
I agree. Language reflects reality, essentially. And as the industry matures, the language and the terminology is going to mature around it as well. So right now, I know you're all following along at home with your copy of the General Theory of the Translation Company. Kidding, of course. But if you are, you can open it up to the glossary and you can go through. And if we were in an actual workshop, we would actually do this because you guys would all have copies of this. And check out any of the terms in the glossary in the back of that book that you'd like to hear more about. But you don't need to do that. You can just enter any terms in the chat. I'll turn the chat back on so that we can. No, then we're hiding my face. I'll come back to you guys in chat. So, jumping into it, Nika, Tell us about language services companies. That's what we already started talking about. LSP, SLSP, SLV. I think these are all, so these are the terms according to the general theory of the translation company. Which one of these have stuck and which ones of these failed hard?
Yeah. Well, we use LSP quite often, and we use LSB quite often.
Yeah,
but I've seen, for example, other associations and organizations use words interchangeably or acronyms interchangeably. I've seen, for example, the HEC uses language service companies, language service companies, I believe.
Really? LSC? Yeah. That's cool.
I'll double check, but I know it wasn't LSP that I saw, but it was a similar acronym. And usually if an acronym is, newer or is getting more traction, you would have the words written out before you add the acronym. Yeah. So whether it's LSP or another combination of words that mean a similar thing, a similar concept, you kind of introduce your reader to what acronym you're introducing, and then fully use that acronym.
You got to train them. There's SLV and MLV aren't on this slide, I've noticed, and I think those are the old ones. Those are the ones that have been around for a while. And SLV and MLV stand for single language vendor and multiple language vendor. Now, when we wrote the book and we redefined these terms, or at least tried to, we changed them to LSP, SLSP, and MLSP. And the reason we did that is it was a conscious decision because I don't know. I like provider better than vendor. It's vendor. The word vendor, you just said, Nika, that words have power. The word vendor to me, anyways, implies a transactional relationship, like a hot dog vendor, a street vendor, right? Whereas providers sounds to me, anyways, folks can disagree with this, but it sounds to me more like a value-added service.
Yeah.
Let's we all know these terms. Let's go in here. We have some quick little videos here that I'm going to expose you to, because why reinvent the wheel if we've already recorded this once? As the world becomes more globalized, particularly for digital products and services, an entire ecosystem of technologies has grown up to support the work of globalization, internationalization, localization, and translation. My name is Tucker Johnson. I'm the co-author of The General Theory of the Translation Company and co-founder of Nimdzi Insights, a market research and consulting firm specializing in helping companies grow globally through strategic investment in mature, scalable globalization processes. Today, we are talking about language technology. So let's take a high-level look at just a few pieces of tech that are crucial to a mature global operation. Most likely, you have never heard of some of these tools, but you can rest assured that there is an entire language technology, or LangTech, ecosystem responsible for driving the global expansion of pretty much every major brand you can think of. Translation management systems, or TMSs, are the backbone of the globalization and localization industry. These are the tools that manage the workflow and the file parsing throughout the lifecycle of a localization project, intaking the source files, managing a process defined by the users, and then exporting the translated files. Most third-party TMS solutions include some sort of program or environment for the translators to work directly in the tool. We refer to these tools as computer-aided translation tools, or CAT tools for short. There are many CAT tools on the market that do not have the full functionality of a TMS. However, most TMS systems will include some form of CAT tool built into their system. More advanced CAT tools have integrations with multilingual terminology management software, automated QA tools, other things that basically help the translator to verify the quality of their work in real time so that there aren't any quality issues down the line. Sometimes the term translation memory system is used as opposed to translation management system. And this is fine, It simply reflects the fact that TMSs maintain bilingual databases of previously translated content to leverage in future projects, and we call these databases translation memories. Translation memories have been around for decades and are an excellent tool for reducing costs by leveraging previous translations to automatically translate new content. Once a sentence or a string is translated, it is stored in the TM so that, in theory at least, you will never have to pay to have that string translated again. The cost benefits of using translation memories through a TMS can be further augmented by integrating it with machine translation. Machine translation, or MT for short, is the fully automated process of having content translated by a computer, completely foregoing human translation. If machine translation sounds too good to be true, well, it's because it is. Don't get me wrong, MT is an incredibly powerful tool, and there are excellent use cases for using raw MT-generated content, such as translating low-impact support documentation, user-generated content, or other content types that don't require that special human touch. The recently updated Nimdzi Language Technology Landscape is a comprehensive report covering 770 different tools related to globalization. It is the definitive guide to the language technology landscape. Technologies are broken down into functional categories, including translation management systems, which we've already discussed, translation business management systems, audiovisual translation tools, quality management tools, integrators, machine translation, including generic MT, MT toolkits, niche MT, custom MT solutions, different marketplaces and platforms, interpreting systems, and speech recognition. Each of these main classifications is then further subdivided into further functional subcategories based on use cases. So, if technology is your jam and you want to find out more about it, head over to nimdzi.com and look for the new language technology landscape, which we also affectionately refer to the LangTech Atlas. So we might be using those terms interchangeably. Attached to the Atlas is a full report by lead researcher Yulia Akulkova, who, along with the rest of the Nimdzi team, is eager to answer any question you would like to send to info@nimdzi.com. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at info@nimdzi.com or to me personally. Once again, my name is Tucker Johnson, founder of Nimdzi Insights. And check out our YouTube channel for more such things like that. I think that pretty much sums it up. Nika, what have you got to add? Correct me. Tell me what I forgot.
There's a lot in there, huh?
Yeah.
So companies coming into the global market who have a really cool product and are ready to get it out there might not necessarily know that there are tons of different technologies out there, or that there are certain technologies that work for what they need at the time, or they're starting with some kind of technology, but they're not really thinking of scaling yet. So they don't know what their options are.
Right.
So maybe let's look at some of the acronyms and the types of technologies that there are, already mentioned by Tucker in the video. And we've got a list here. These you can find, again, in the Language Technology Atlas, which is an incredible resource because it is updated regularly, and because it's organized into sections where you're able to see all the logos of the companies that pertain to that type of tool. So, for example, one of the bigger ones, translation management systems, TMSs. That's the number one on the slide here, translation management systems. In that resource, you're going to see there are more than one. There's more than one type of tool out there for translation management. And again, companies coming into this new space might not know what their needs are yet. So great tool to see what there is, what's out there. Check it out.
And
Sorry,
I've been running this by myself for too long. I always want to jump in and interrupt. Keep going.
Do it. Oh no, I like it.
No, I was just gonna say, to me, a cat tool and a TMS, and folks in the chat, speak up if you have strongly held beliefs about this. But to me, the line between CAT tool and TMS and BMS, business management solution, is those lines are getting fuzzier. They're getting more and more blurred, right? Because it seems that, most TMSs these days have a CAT tool as a part of a computer-aided translation tool. A CAT tool is, so the difference being a CAT tool is the tool that you use to take the file and convert it into a bilingual, basically, spreadsheet that you as a translator can just sit there and translate in English, target, or source target, right? And then reinsert it back into the whatever file format it was when it started. Now, a translation management system does all of that, but it also manages translation, TMs, translation memories, and there's workflow. There can be workflow and business management components to it. But Yulia Kokova does a really great job of drawing the lines between these different types of technology, but in my mind, it just seems like it's getting more and more blurred.
It's a little blurred. Well, the goal is to get you to do your work, right, and to do it efficiently.
Right.
So, a business management tool, for example, might have an invoicing component, whereas some TMSs might not have that, or some CAT tools might not necessarily have like an invoicing component.
Language Technology Provider, LTP. That's one of ours. I made that one up, and people use it now. Ha! And I see you guys in the comments saying all of the stuff that's on my list that nobody uses, and yeah, I'm aware of that. Hashtag fail. I tried. Let's do this again, because we got some more terminology here. We're talking about in language services. We hear L10n. What else? G11n. I18n. Internationalization. All of these X number N's. And those can be kind of intimidating. Those can be kind of confusing. And even if you know what they stand for, what is translation? What is localization? What is internationalization? What is globalization? What are the differences between these two things? How do we use them? What are the actual definitions? And what are the I would say, common definitions that we use in our industry? And oh, look, we have an expert to explain this to us. GILT, G-I-L-T, stands for Globalization, Internationalization, Localization, and Translation. But what do these terms mean? That's what we're going to talk about today, so let's dive right in. My name is Tucker Johnson. I am the co-author of the General Theory of the Translation Company and one of the co-founders of Nimdzi Insights, where we provide market research and consulting specialized for localization. Today, we are living in a globalized, connected world. It's easier than ever for brands to have a global presence. For companies with a mature approach to international operations, this presents a huge opportunity to reach new customers. However, it can also be a huge risk for companies that do not invest effectively into the activities known as GILT. Once again, globalization, internationalization, localization, and translation. But wait, what are these activities and what's the difference? There are a surprisingly large number of different answers out there. A lot of people disagree as to the exact definitions. So today, we might not be able to settle the debate once and for all, but we will discuss how these terms are used in real language by industry professionals. In other words, we're ignoring the dictionary and going straight to the source. While this is a huge topic that could be discussed for hours, I'm going to try my best to keep this short and sweet today. Let's start with globalization. Globalization is often abbreviated with the numeronym G11n, with the 11 representing the 11 numbers between the G and the N. Globalization refers to all the activities necessary to make your product or service ready for global markets. This is typically used as an all-encompassing term that includes the other activities of internationalization, localization, and translation. For example, in common industry jargon, the term globalization department is often the term that is used to refer to the internal teams that liaise with products and developers to ensure that everything is properly internationalized and localized. The term is sometimes used to refer to a sort of high-level internationalization, which seeks to answer questions like, have you removed any features or components that are specific just to your home market? Or can the product or service be adapted to local standards, such as sizing, power supplies, and other hardware requirements, just to name a few. Internationalization is the process of making sure that your products and services are able to be adapted to each market, essentially going several layers deeper into the weeds than globalization. Is all of the English text able to be easily exported and then re-imported in order to facilitate the translation process? Do you support the necessary fonts and encoding for other languages? Does your user interface support right to left and bidirectional scripts like Arabic or Hebrew? If these things and many other things were not taken into account during product development, or even if they were, then your product needs to be internationalized. Particularly for organizations that have a strong digital presence, there can be a lot of hidden steps to internationalizing. This is a process that looks very different for each company because every organization has different products, software, both internal and external software, and most importantly, different customers. While there are some standardizations available for software localization, they can be invasive and really they have inconsistent results. This is why most organizations develop an internationalization program internally, perhaps with the help of outside suppliers. One note is that internationalization is the last step before we start localization, which involves potentially dozens of other languages. This means it is our last chance to fix issues once before they go into translation. Otherwise, one small issue with the source file can multiply into however many languages you're translating into. Much more efficient to fix these issues once before translating or adapting anything into the local markets. So, speaking of adapting into the local markets, let's talk about localization. This is the process of adapting content for individual markets. So while globalization and internationalization are concerned with whether your product is acceptable for the world or all markets, localization takes that internationalized product and actually starts the adaptation process. There is more to localization than just translating. This is the step where each individual market will be taken into consideration and cultural linguistically correct changes are made. These changes range in severity from small things, like changing slang terms to local vernacular, all the way up to mission-critical issues, like ensuring you don't include content that's offensive either to your users or to world governments in which you're operating. You don't want to wake up one day and realize that you're banned in China because you included the wrong flag in your language drop-down list. These are the type of things localization covers. While translation only focuses on written text, localization focuses on the overall product. Images can be swapped out for more culturally relevant content. Color schemes can be changed between markets to account for the different cultural perceptions of colors. Features can be added or removed in order to better align with the values of individual markets. One last thing to note about localization is that in common speech, industry professionals can easily overuse this term. We often use localization when referring to what is actually translation. For this reason, if you are ever having an important conversation with somebody about localization, for example, you're buying localization from them or you're selling localization to them, make sure to clarify just what service you're talking about and what the extent of that service is prior to agreeing to anything. Now let's talk about translation. Translation is, well, translation. This is the act of taking words in one language and converting them into words in another language. Sounds simple. Strictly speaking, this refers to literal translation. So literal translation would not adapt any concepts or features of the product beyond the text that is found within it. That would be more the domain of localization, I would say, adapting things more fluently. Literal translation, we're just talking about translation. Computer-aided translation, or CAT, C-A-T, tools can extract the source text for translation and then insert translated text back into the product. It's up to you whether you want to use a fully automated machine translation or actually include human translators into that process. So, as we see, each of the components of GILT, globalization, internationalization, localization, and translation, has an important role to play. But the lines between each of these can easily get crossed. You will hear different people use different definitions, and that's okay. So my final tip is, don't get caught up in the terminology. Instead, ask yourself, are we approaching globalization activities strategically and efficiently? Are we providing the same level of commitment to our international customers as we would do for customers at home? And are we doing all these things in an efficient, scalable manner by implementing globalization best practices surrounding internationalization, localization, and translation? If you want to learn more, check out Nimdzi.com, where we have an ever-growing library of resources for forward-thinking globalization leaders. Or you can contact us directly at info@nimdzi.com. Once again, my name is Tucker Johnson. Thank you for listening.
All right, Tucker Johnson, that's enough from the sales pitch. I just can't get over how clean my office was back then. I need to do.
Life happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's Friday. It's Friday, and I promise to you guys, I do own more than one shirt.
Well, it's funny that you asked me to be co-host because you and I have our weekly syncs on Fridays, and our conversations go all over the place.
They go all over the place. Yeah. So this is actually very structured for us. Let's take a look at next round of terminology here. I think that was a nice little intro here. But we can break this one up in, the process, the service, the people. We're going to get more into the nitty-gritty here with this stuff on here. Nika, take it away. I'm going to go stalk people in the comment section.
Excellent. Our favorite things. All right. So if you work at a translation company or an LSP or a language, however you want to say that word, we use LSP. If you work at an LSP, take a screenshot of this slide, and I'm going to give away a little secret. So this would be a perfect outline for a blog post, for example, when you're trying to get your client to know what are the different things that you work on at your company. What are the different processes? What are the different services that your company offers? You might see transcreation as a service, and you might be from a completely different space and have no idea what goes into transcreation. So not only are you educating your client with these terms, but you're also gaining some SEO points because people are going to be searching for things like that. So here on the slide, we've got parts broken down into process, people, and services. So a lot of these people probably have heard of before. So handoff and hand back, the process of working through files. You get something as a project manager, you need to get that translated. You're going to send that to your vendor, to your talent. They have a deadline. They give you a deliverable, and then you give that back to your client. Turnaround time is how long that process takes from the client giving you the file to the client receiving the file. That's the client's turnaround time. You might have a turnaround time for your vendor, right? You're keeping track of all of that. Your KPIs and your SLAs, which we will talk about soon. But so you might want to track your turnaround time. How are you doing as a company with that? Are you late? Are you on time? Are your clients happy? Then the people, we've got project managers who are there in the war zone trying to get things done on time and make people happy. Project managers oftentimes can also be account managers. They are working with the client. They are also working with the vendor. So they know what's going on. They see the files. They know all of the cool features that an app is going to be launching before the product is live, right? You have your vendor manager who's working with your vendor, who's vetting your vendors. What kind of solutions do you want to provide for your client?
Vendor managers are the unsung heroes of our industry. I think project managers get a lot of credit and a lot of attention, and they very much deserve it. Don't get me wrong, but vendor managers do a lot of the heavy lifting, and that, like, one of our theses in the general theory is that there's three core functions to an LSP. There's project management, vendor management, and there's sales. And these are the ways that an LSP, a language services provider, adds value to the language services value chain, right? And vendor management is right smack dab there in the middle, because this is what we do as language services providers. We find people. We find people that can deliver a product for our clients. We don't actually do a lot of the work ourselves internally. I say ourselves. If you're from an LSP, it's ourselves. So I just want to call that out.
Yeah, and if you're at an LSP which is growing, you might be doing project management and vendor management.
Yeah.
And quality assurance.
Yeah.
And you might be on
these are
sales,
functions.
too.
They're not roles, right? These aren't job titles. So project manager is a job title. But when we're talking about project management in this context, or vendor management from this, no, I spelled that wrong. Vendor management in this context, I'm talking about the role that is, or the function, I should say, the function. So a project manager absolutely can do vendor management. I've had to do vendor management as a project manager myself. Find your own people, basically. Hit up pros, hit up ATA, send some emails. Ideally, though, in a large, growing, larger, more mature organization, you're going to have a split between these roles.
Multiple vendor managers.
I wanted to call out, and we don't need to go through all of these. Like, if this were an actual workshop, I would go what I do is I'd go through the ones that I think are interesting, and then I'd ask if anyone has questions about the other ones. And the ones that I think are interesting and worthy of attention are, I suppose I should bring it up here, are localization engineer under people, bottom left, if you're following along in the slides. And I want to call this out because loc engineers are not what a lot of people think of as an engineer. And certainly no disrespect to loc engineers, anybody out there. But a lot of times when an LSP is talking about a localization engineer, we're talking about pushing files. We're talking about making handoffs and handbacks. We're talking about running files through the TMS, parsing them into a CAT tool, the stuff that we talked about earlier. But it's not typically, they're not writing code, right? They're not developing apps. And there's, engineer, when you hear the word engineer on the client side, it means something very different. So it's much more senior, much more hard qualifications in there, the level of work that they're doing. So just keep that in mind. If you're coming into this industry new, when you hear that word, just question it. What loc engineer? Okay, tell me what they do, right? And I think that's a good practice for pretty much any of these terms. Like if I'm talking about LQA, and we'll get to that, I'm not going to assume my client knows what LQA is, and if they do, I'm not going to assume that we're working with the same definition of LQA. What is LQA? Is it language quality assurance, or is it language quality assessment? Okay, I'm bearing the lead here, but we'll get to that on the next slide. We've talked about GILT, Globalization, International Localization, Translation. The next thing I want to call out is TEP, or TEP, as I always refer to it now, thanks to Juanma Lopez's program that he was running, that series that he ran on YouTube. And it stands for Translation, Editing, Proofreading. Pretty straightforward, right? Translation, Editing, Proofreading. I want to call this out because in my career, help me guys in the comments if your experience is different. But in my career, 9 times out of 10, when someone's talking about TEP, translation, editing, proofreading, like what they really mean is translation and proofreading. Essentially, it's not a 3-step process many times. And the reason why this is important to call out is if you're buying TEP, or if you're submitting a proposal to sell TEP, it's very important that you clarify together up front what exactly do you mean by that. Do you want it touched by 3 people or not, essentially? And yeah, I think that's it. Anything on here that you wanted to call out? Those were the ones. I'm not going to touch interpreting. Sorry if there's interpreters listening, but we don't had time to go into the different modalities of interpreting and the whole lingo around that, but it is fascinating. Maybe we need to create a video about that, Nika, so that we can play it in our next workshop. All right.
Cool.
Let's get paid. Let's make some money. Getting paid. So, on this slide, you're going to see a bunch of words that have to do essentially with getting paid, right? These are how we charge for services or how we buy services, and kind of some of the language that goes into some of the typical contracts that you see here in the language services industry. Per word rate is if you're new here, and that's the target audience of this Nimdzi Live. If you're new here, per word rate. We charge per word. That's how translation is sold. Typically, it's not charged per hour. It's charged how many words am I converting into how many other words, and typically it's the source words, meaning the words that you start with. Now, we talked about translation memories, and one of the things that you get when using a CAT tool with the translation memory is you get TM matches or fuzzy matches. Nika, tell us about fuzzy matches.
Fuzzy matches. Well, they're these hairy. I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. Fuzzy matches are Sasquatches in love. No,
my foot after the cast came off.
Yeah, your foot after the cast came off. Yeah.
We're silly. So fuzzy matches are what the systems that your environment that you're translating in, it's going to flag or show to you combinations of things that were previously translated that you may want to leverage in your translation again. So for example, if you've previously translated the dog is brown, and now you need to translate the dog is orange, the dog is already in your environment. And again, this is like a very simple example, but imagine you're doing something very technical and you're translating a manual and it has very similar technical language. You're going to come across structures that are similar in your source text. So if you've translated something before, your system is going to flag the fact that it's been translated before as a fuzzy match. So you're going to get percentages in your fuzzy match. In the example of the dog is brown and the dog is orange, you have a 66.6666666% match, right? So as a translator, you're going to have your previous match as an option for you to now go in and change brown to orange or black to orange. So that's a fuzzy match. And as it's important because not only is it a way to optimize the process, you don't have to retranslate things again. You're also, there's a financial aspect to it too. So if something's already been translated before and you don't have to translate it as many times or as much of that sentence doesn't need to be translated again, your client, if you... So that's a fuzzy match. And
sorry.
If you're a translation company, your client is going to be charged less because you don't have to put in the work to retranslate that again. So it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the translators because you've got that stuff already in front of you and it's helping you move along through the document. It's a win for the translation companies because things are getting done and you want your client to be happy as well. And it's a win for the client because they are paying a percentage of what needs to be translated.
I couldn't...
Or the percentage, of original text that needs to be translated.
Yeah, it's a complicated subject, and it also brings us into this next section here on weighted word counts. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. It also brings me into this next subject on weighted word counts here. Weighted word counts are essentially a way of taking the fuzzy matches. So let's say you have a 90% fuzzy match, a 75% fuzzy match. Well, you're just going to weight those word counts. So every non-match is one word, right? One word. And if you have a sentence that is a 75% fuzzy match, then each one of those words in that sentence are going to be worth 0.75 words. And you're going to add all of them up, and you're going to get a number that presumably is lower than your total word count. And your total word count is just adding up all of the words, period. Right? It's a challenging subject that, frankly, took me years as a project manager to really actually understand what are we talking about with weighted word counts. But it's worthy of mentioning on here.
And it's important for all the parties. Like as a translator, you want to get paid for your work.
Right.
So as you're negotiating your contract with either your translation company or a client, if you're working directly with an end client, you want to be aware of how the technology is going to flag that stuff and what you're getting paid for, because you want to get paid for your work, right? Just because it's been translated doesn't mean that you don't have to go in and do work. You still have to change brown to orange.
Yeah.
Right? You still have to be aware of what's going on.
One of the stories here, too, is you mentioned, like, if you're a translator, you want to get paid for your work. One of the stories here to take away from this is, like, this is what's normal. Wait, let me look. Yeah, like this is what's normal. Per word rate, fuzzy rates, weighted word counts, retainer fees, less common in our industry. But those top three, that's the normal. And knowing the normal, then perhaps you can avoid some of these disruptive new models that are being pushed by some folks out there. Every once in a while, every couple of years, someone has a really beautiful, bright idea to disrupt the industry by changing the way that we buy localization, buy and sell localization. You know, getting away with the per word model or doing some sort of dynamic translation matching type thing where you don't know. There's different things out there for a different podcast, but this is the normal here. I wanted to go back because I saw an excellent question from. I actually lost it, so I forget who it was from. But someone was asking about language justice. Why is my camera not working? Someone's asking about language justice, and what does that in the context of this industry? You'll see them come up here eventually, if we wait long enough. And language justice, I've heard that term used essentially, it can be used interchangeably with language access. So language access is a term that's very popular when talking about mandated or regulated spaces where you're, a government agency or an organization is in a position where they're required to provide language access to someone. They're required. So an example is here in the United States, as in many other countries around the world, if I go to a hospital and I don't speak English, I have the right to an interpreter. I have the right to language access. And in recent years, I've started seeing this term language justice pop up, or language justice and access pop up. I was just working on a proposal for a language justice and access project. And so it's coming. It's the new lingo, and thank you for highlighting that. I'll give you a shout out when I find you. But thank you for highlighting that because it's a new term, and I like new terms because it makes me feel smart and hip.
And because it's it means that those terms are needed. If we're creating those terms again, that means there's a need for that, right?
To our previous point, absolutely. Anything else on here that we need to go over? Hourly project management fee we can talk about. So typically, this is the way project management is billed in our industry. It's a fee. So you add up all of the words, you times them by the rate that you're charging on the per word rate, and then on top of that, you'll add a project management fee as a percentage. Traditionally, typically, project management fees, I want to say, are between 3 and 10%, but they're getting lower, I believe, over the years. But between 3 and 10%. I've seen them go as high as 20% for super high-touch, complicated projects. And, of course, I've seen them go as low as 0% if the client is a really good negotiator. But essentially, project management fees are a way to recoup some of the costs of the overhead and administration of getting the translations. That having been said, they usually don't. Right? They cover a portion of the actual cost of that project manager, and the LSP will typically have to absorb the rest themselves.
We've also got here, maybe you want to touch on this, SOW MSA purchase order.
Yeah.
So New York MSA PO.
I'm just watching the clock here. So MSA purchase order, MSA contract, so purchase order, contracts, SOW, MSA. These are all three different things. They're three different documents. Not every client is going to need all of these documents. Some clients don't care about any of these documents. They just send you files and say, send me an invoice. They don't even need a contract, right? But SOW stands for Statement of Work. Sometimes it can stand for Scope of Work. MSA stands for Master Services Agreement, and PO stands for Purchase Order. And contract is self-explanatory. So an SOW is a scope of work, statement of work, basically outlining this is the type of work that we're going to engage with together between a buyer and a vendor, a provider. That SOW can be in the form of a contract, or it can be an addition, like an amendment to a contract. A lot of times it'll typically be an amendment, or not an amendment, an attachment to a contract that you sign. Contracts are long and filled with a bunch of boring stuff, but the most important things in there are going to be your rates, any SLAs that you have and that are agreed upon, any milestones that you have agreed upon, and then it's going to be your scope of work or your statement of work at the bottom usually. Master Services Agreement is a separate contract, a separate legal document that both parties will sign. That kind of outlines a lot of just the governance. What does the relationship look like? What are the expectations from both parties? And those expectations can be things like, hey, don't use our logo in your marketing material, right? Don't, there's a lot of privacy and security concerns and stuff like that typically in MSAs. They can be in addition to the contract, or you can cover all of those items in a contract if you want to keep it simple. And a purchase order is essentially like a commitment. Like, here's a purchase order. I am putting in writing that I'm purchasing these services, and upon delivery, I'm going to pay you this much. So it's just kind of like a mini. And purchase orders are usually issued when you already have a contract or SOW and or MSA in place. So it's basically, you don't have to cover all of those other details. It's just bam, here you go. Here's the files, the names of the files, the number of the word counts, and the amount that we're going to pay you.
Excellent.
Let's, I want to get into LQA here. I want to get into LQA because I kind of mentioned this earlier. Like, the moral of the story here, and we're going to start going quick here because I'm watching the clock. The moral of the story here is when someone's talking about LQA, language quality assurance, or heck, when someone's talking about quality in and of itself, then you need to ask them, what are you talking about? What is the definition of what we're talking about? Not because you don't know, not because you need an answer, not because they don't know, the client doesn't know, but because you need to make sure that you are working with the same working definition. Because if I'm talking about language quality assurance and someone else is talking about language quality assessment, well, those can be two very different things, right? So you have that conversation with the client or with your vendor and say, when you say LQA, tell me exactly what that includes. And then you can have a meaningful conversation about it. And, of course, self-certification, in-context LQA, third-party LQA, all different flavors of LQA that can be outlined in a scope of work. But the main moral of this story is whenever you're having a conversation about quality with people, LQA, you say, what do you mean by LQA? But even with just quality, you need to say, what do we mean by quality? Define quality. Because quality means something very different to different people. And what one buyer or client might define as high quality might look very different from another client.
And it might also depend on the type of work. For a marketing campaign, there's one sort of standard. For another type of translation, it's very different.
Taos has this dynamic quality framework, DQF, which is, very popular. It's not just industry standard. And like a big portion of that is, you don't need the same level of quality for everything, right? So how are you going to categorize your content and make sure that it's, you're not wasting money doing 3 rounds of revisions on a document that no one's ever going to read? Are you all right, guys? I haven't been watching the comments, so I don't know what's going on over there, but I'll try to get to you really quickly here. Same thing with testing. We don't need to go into this one too much, but it's kind of the same thing. What do you mean by testing? There's localization testing, functional testing, linguistic testing, screenshot testing, on-device testing, all different kinds of flavors. Localization testing is, typically testing, like you have an app, you translate it, you get the translated apps back, you got to test it because, Russian text takes up 30% more space than English text. Don't quote me on that, but it takes up more space than English text. So there's going to be overflow. There's going to be bugs in it. You got to do the localization testing. You got to look at the language, right? Are any words truncated? Are any words misspelled? Functional testing. Who cares if the words are misspelled? Does the app still work once I put the pieces back together? That's functional testing. You can offshore that to a country that doesn't speak the language that they're testing. You can just write some scripts and they can test it. Linguistic testing is basically kind of in-context QA. testing, but really taking a look at the language. And why is that important? It's important because remember, you're translating in a CAT tool, which is taking everything out of, let's say, your PDF. You have a PDF, you suck it all out into a CAT tool. Here's your English, you fill in all the translation, and then you suck it back in to the PDF, right? So that PDF is going to look very different than it was when it first started, and the words might mean different things from what you thought they meant when you were translating it. Because when you're translating it, you're just looking at a CAT tool. You need to review it in context because it might have a completely different meaning depending upon where it's placed on the page or the content around it.
Yeah.
Measuring success, KPI, SLA. So one of our most popular, I'm going to get to that, but KPI, key performance indicator, SLA, service level agreement, CAP, corrective action plan, RCA, root cause analysis, postmortems. Postmortems are great because they're basically a process that you go through after you finish a project to say what went well, what didn't go well, what can we do better next time. They're a very valuable tool for improving efficiency. Quarterly business reviews are referred to as QBRs. I've got a ton of stuff published on QBRs. I can talk about QBRs all day, and I have before. Go find those recordings if you want to know more. Penalties. We probably saw penalties over on the Getting Paid page because I wanted to bring this up because a lot of times if you don't meet your KPIs that you agreed to with your client, you're going to incur penalties, which means at the end of the month when you're sending their invoice, they're going to say, nice try, take off 5% because you failed the KPIs. That's what a penalty is. They can't do that just out of the blue, but of course they can do that if you have a predefined service level agreement or SLA within either the master services agreement or the contract. To go a little bit deeper, because I get this question a lot, and we have an article it's been there for years on Nimdzi.com. What is the difference between SLAs, service level agreements, and KPIs? And I spent years when I was a project manager starting out in this industry trying to figure out, because I heard people talk about SLAs, I heard people talk about KPIs, and frankly, I didn't know the difference between them, and more frankly, I don't think the people that were using the words knew the difference between them. I think a lot of us just use these words interchangeably, but they're not really the same things. SLAs look forward. They are a commitment. They are an agreement at the service level, right? They are an agreement about the level of service that can be expected in the course of the relationship, right? KPIs look backwards, and they're performance indicators. They indicate the performance of key issues in the account or key things that you're keeping a track of. So they're backward facing. Now, the reason that there's a lot of confusion around these is because an SLA can become a KPI. If I have an SLA that, I expect my handback, my deliverables to be within 24 hours of the handoff, it's our previous terminology, then that's an SLA. And we codify that into the agreement, the master services agreement, we're good to go. Now, once I sign that contract, I'm going to define a new KPI. And the KPIs are basically, what am I tracking? What data, what metrics am I tracking? And our colleague Miguel Sepulveda has some great workshops on defining KPIs, building a KPI metric ecosystem for the client side. A lot of times the KPIs are dictated by the client side. And I highly recommend you guys go check those out as well. The last thing, now we're getting into like Tuck's favorites, because these are the things that I hear people mess up a lot, and it's risky to mess these up. What is profit margin and what is markup? What is margin and what is markup? And I hear people use these terms interchangeably too often. Very smart people use these terms interchangeably, and it's dangerous. So it's not like, if you don't know the difference, I ain't calling you stupid, because a lot of smart people use these wrong. Markup is basically based upon cost. Margin is based upon sales. So for markup is what percentage did you increase the acquisition costs,
right? So in this example, we buy something for $100 and we sell it for $200. We acquired it. The acquisition cost was $100. How much did we mark it up? 100%. See, there is a quiz. There is a quiz. I should make you put your answers in the comment. Margin, on the other hand, is based upon sales. So if I bought something for $100 and I sold it for $200, what percentage of $200 is $100? Right? And I hope I should put the actual things on here. So it would be, this would be a 100% markup, and it would be a 50% margin for this sale. And if you have questions about that, maybe I need to do another video. But I hope we did an okay job of explaining it. Lastly, solution. I hate, buzzwords. This isn't about solutions. And we're talking about synonyms for this word solutions, because I think this word is way overused in our industry, but I don't think it's the only word that's overused in this industry. And I encourage you guys is use the buzzwords, know the buzzwords, love the buzzwords, but have some synonyms in it. There's nothing worse than reading a proposal where a proposal for services, in the first paragraph, you see the word solution 9 times. So here you go. Instead of solutions, call it the fix. Call it the oomph. I mean, some of these are kind of silly, but I think I made my point. Nika?
Pixie dust.
Pixie dust. Is that on there? Yes, it is. Pixie dust. Like
Put that into your contracts.
They're silly. All right. Wrapping it up here. Just and this is how we do workshops and e-learnings at Nimdzi. It's kind of a standardized format. We summarize at the end. So you name it, you own it. Please go out there, invent new terms. Send them out there into the world. Some of them will stick. Most of them will not. As you guys have been pointing out in the comments, all of the terms that we use in the book that never caught on. Thank you for that dose of humility. Knowing the terminology is important for productive conversations. You can't have a productive conversation about something until you agree upon the terminology. Because you might be arguing 2 completely different points, or you might be arguing the same point and not even realize it. Not everybody uses the same terminology. If you're talking about LQA, if you're talking about TEP, clarify, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by quality? And there are many other terms to describe similar concepts. You don't overuse solution. Don't know the buzzwords, but you don't need to stick just to the buzzwords. You should have some synonyms in there. And hot diggity, we are only 2 minutes over time. I didn't think we'd make that, Nika. Anything else to add?
Use hot diggity instead of pixie dust. Some hot diggity.
Hot diggity. Give it some hot diggity. I have no idea how many folks down there I'm neglecting in the chat with your questions. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'll bring it back up on screen. You, as you know, you're the most important part of Nimdzi Live. And we'll get to your questions afterwards. But frankly, I have a hard stop 2 minutes ago. So we're going to call this a day, and I'm going to play the outro music. So if you've enjoyed this episode of Nimdzi Live, then join us next time on
Nimdzi Live.
Monday?
Monday you're doing, You're doing
Monday.
Something.
We're talking to John Flannery, friend of the show. He's been back. We've had him on before. We're going to talk about what can you do to level up your sales team in 3 days or less. And it's good. Man does good work over there. So also don't forget to check out the industry events calendar. Events are back going these days. Nimdzi.com/events. We have, and if you have an event, submit it so that it can go on the calendar. Lots of people use that to plan their travel schedules for the year. So, once again, my name is Tucker Johnson.
Thank you. I'm Nika Allahverdi.
She's Nika Allahverdi. And we appreciate our guests. We didn't have any guests today. We appreciate you guys in chat. We appreciate everybody that does industry insights. We appreciate it when I have my script prepared better than I do today. So I'm going to cut our losses while we're ahead here, and we'll sign off. We'll see you next time. Join us on Monday when we talk with John Flannery of Flannery Sales Solutions. And have a great day.
See you soon.